All right, I thought I would just make a quick little video. Continuing on with Jacob, I loved, Esau, I hated, and hopefully by the end of this little video series, you get a better understanding of God's bigger plan, bigger picture for saving all of Israel and also for saving the Gentiles, which is us, and ultimately saving the whole world. So let's just go over here. Excuse me. So I have a bunch of names from the lineage of Abraham, and I'm just going to place them, and I'll just share my thoughts as I'm doing this, and hopefully, like I said, this will make sense to you. So we have Abraham, we have Nahor, we have Haran. So basically, Abraham was a triplet. So he has two other brothers. Haran dies at a young age. We don't really know why. Here's their father, Terah. So Terah has Abraham, Nahor, Haran. Haran has two kids, Milcah, his daughter, Lot, his son, which will be important later. And then Abraham, of course, has a wife, Sarah. So we'll put it down here. And Nahor actually, we'll put Haran up here because by this time, he's already dead, passed away. So Milcah actually is Nahor's wife. So he basically marries the daughter of Haran. And then we have Abraham has a son. Well, before we get into that, we got to talk about Hagar here. Sarah has a handmaid, which is Hagar. And after the promise was made, Sarah's like, you know what? My husband's too old. I'm too old. Maybe Hagar could actually have a child for me. And she has Ishmael. And instead of Hagar giving Ishmael to Sarah, she decides to keep Ishmael and basically taught Terah. Sarah goes to Abraham, says, look at this. Look at what's going on here. Hagar is insulting me. She has a son, and I don't have a son. So she tries to send Hagar away. An angel says, go back to Sarah, just kind of hang out there for a little while. And you'll be blessed as well. In fact, Ishmael actually has 12 princes. So then we continue on here. So Sarah ultimately has Isaac. And this is the promise is coming through Abraham, his firstborn son, through Sarah, because the promise is made to both Sarah and Abraham. So this is the lineage that we're following here. Isaac ends up having twins, Jacob and Esau. And before Jacob and Esau were born, Isaac has a wife named Rebecca. And God tells Rebecca that inside your stomach, inside your womb, I should say, inside your stomach, inside your womb, you have basically two nations. And the older will serve the younger. So in regards to Jacob, I loved, Esau, I hated. This is basically the foreshadowing of that, where Rebecca is being told this is what's going to happen even before they are born. So it doesn't matter what Jacob did, good or bad. Doesn't matter what Esau did, good or bad. This is where the lineage is going to come, is through Jacob. That's very important to know. So it's not, God doesn't hate Esau personally, but it's the nation of Esau. Jacob becomes Israel. His name gets changed to Israel. So Israel becomes the nation where ultimately Jesus Christ comes through. So let's just continue here. So Jacob, where is this here? Laban, Nahor. Oh yeah, okay. So Nahor and Milcah have a son who is Bethelu, Beth Bethuel, and Bethuel has a son named Laban, and Laban has two daughters, Rachel and Leah. I should put it like this because Leah is actually older than Rachel. So then, before Isaac dies, he makes Jacob promise that he's not going to get away from the Canaanites because they are actually a cursed nation from going back all the way from after the flood, where Cain, sorry, Ham comes in and approaches the naked body of a drunk Noah and makes fun of him, makes sport of him, and the other two brothers come in backwards with a blanket or whatever to cover Noah, and Noah curses uh, Ham's children, basically the Canaanites. So this is one of the reasons why God is giving the land to Abraham, because Canaan is cursed. So the Canaanites are all cursed. So just once it gets to a certain amount of time, then the Israelites will take over the land. So that's important. So we have Jacob ends up falling in love with Rachel, and through some sneakery, Laban gives Leah to Jacob, and Leah ends up having a son, which I did put on here, which is Reuben. That's the firstborn son. Rachel ends up not having any sons. Then they have handmaids as well. So, but the blessing comes through Jacob's lineage, through both Leah and Rachel, which is quite interesting when you think about it. So this is where the blessing comes through. This is where the 12 tribes of Israel get formed right here. 12 tribes of Israel. Right here. This is where you have Reuben, Simeon, all the other brothers, including Joseph and Benjamin, all coming under here. So this is where the blessing happens. This is where the covenant goes through on this side. So basically, let me just draw an arrow here, if I can do that. So basically, you have Abraham has Isaac, Isaac has Jacob, Jacob has the 12 tribes of Israel through Leah and Rachel. And the interesting thing is, when Sarah dies, Leah actually gets put in the same tomb as Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and Rebecca. It's kind of interesting. Rachel ends up dying on the way because she has Benjamin and dies, I believe it's just outside of Bethlehem. So Jacob makes a tomb for her, puts her there. But it's interesting that Leah ends up being in the tomb with Abraham and Sarah. And what's also doubly interesting is one of Leah's four sons ends up having, ultimately, this is where Jesus comes through, the lineage of Judah, which is kind of interesting when you think about it. Some people might think, oh, it's through Rachel because Jacob loved Rachel. But this is to show that the election has nothing to do with what people are doing. It has more with God's plan. That's the big thing to note. So I know this is a little bit all over the place, but just so you get an idea, again, when it comes to Jacob, I loved, Esau, I hated, it has nothing to do with us as human beings. This has more to do with God's plan. He has a plan in place so that ultimately, when Jesus came to earth and died on the cross for us Gentiles can have salvation through that. And then ultimately it goes back to Israel, where God will have mercy on Israel and all of Israel will be saved. But this is how it starts out. So I hope that makes sense to you. And if you like this type of content, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in another video. Bye for now. Ciao.